Welcome in to another new podcast from the AMP Publications team. I'm your host, Ben Dubose, news editor for AMP Publications. Today, I'm joined by Bob Chalker, CEO of the association. Bob, thanks for joining us. How are you?
Good, Ben. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm thrilled to have you. Thank you for rescheduling. We were actually supposed to tape this last week, but it conflicted with the Astros championship parade. So Bob was a gracious enough boss to reschedule. So on behalf of certainly myself, but also Astros fans across Houston, we thank you for letting us take a little bit of time off to enjoy that.
Yeah, Ben, no problem. I guess all the schools canceled in the area, so I didn't have much choice.
Except for Katie, somehow
Yeah,
Katie
except for
ISD got
Katie.
got bullied by not just people in the community, but the Astros themselves, including Alex Bregman. That was quite a scene. But
Yes.
thankfully, that's in the rearview mirror. People in Houston got to celebrate, and now we can all move forward with our jobs. And for you, you're actually going into what, the final 8-9 months of your current role?
Yeah, coming down to the last 8 or 9 months. So not sure the exact date yet that I'll step away. I'm actually calling it a retreading as opposed to retiring, but
There you go.
the probably the first week of July. We've left it a little bit open to make sure the transition is as smooth as possible. So,
Yeah.
but I will say I am booking an RV trip for the middle of July, so it's not going to drag on too long.
Perfect. Yeah, we'll say July 4th. The holiday
Yeah.
is a good point to potentially break it. And yeah, that's what we're going to be discussing today on the podcast. Bob is CEO of AMP, previously CEO of NACE. When did you first join NACE?
In 2010. In fact, I can't remember now if it was the 1st of July, maybe the middle of July, but it was in the July of 2010. So it'll be 13 years when I step away.
Okay.
To the day.
Lucky 13, if you will.
Yeah.
And you are still going to be in place at the annual conference in March, correct?
Very much so, and very much looking forward to it.
Yeah.
An opportunity to see people and a little bit of a last hurrah. But yes, I will still be engaged with the organization and at the conference.
Yeah, and that's what we're going to be discussing today. The announcement has been out there. In case any of you haven't seen that, you can go to amp.org. We put it out in, I believe, late summer was when it went public, correct?
Yeah, it depends whether you call it summer or fall, but in that
August, September range. Yeah. Okay. So Bob is going to be retiring in July 2023. The search is ongoing for the next CEO of AMP, the Association for Materials Protection and Performance. And what we're going to be doing in this episode is going through just some of the considerations, why this was the right time, and also looking at what the path forward looks like and what potentially is going to lead to a new CEO being named in the coming months. But before we get to the process forward, I want to retroactively look at your thought process over the preceding months and why you thought this was the right time to make this move. What was it that made July 2023 the right time for you to step away?
Great question, Ben. So, first of all, this decision came together fairly quickly. I mean, I would be less than truthful to say that the idea of retirement hasn't been somewhat on my mind for a little while. I'm 61 years old and been at this a long time, and so planning for retirement like everybody else does, financially and other ways, and so it's sort of been in the planning process. But I really didn't have it targeted or was necessarily working towards it until my wife and I were on vacation the first week of August. We go with a group of friends. Actually, it's 3 families and 3 generations now, so there's about 30 of us, and we run a lake house in Table Rock area, Table Rock, Missouri. And one of the couples that was there, they had sort of put their retirement in place, and we were discussing it one night and what they've done and how they're ready for it. And she has stepped away from her job and he has stepped away from his. And it really just got my wife and I thinking. And so you have the opportunity with a little bit of time and space being on vacation, and you have some incentive, and then you have an example of somebody who's done it. My wife looked at me on Friday morning and said, "Why can't you retire?" And I said, "Maybe we can." And so we spent several weeks looking at all the things you look at, financials, where we're going to live, what will we do with the time that we get, and how are we going to make sure that we're being productive. And then a couple other things came into play. My dad, who was the most incredible father, but he had two things in his life. He had his kids, his family, his wife, and his work. And he worked until his early 80s. And I just remember thinking, that's not what I want to do. That's not what I want to do. And so I had that going on. And then a year or so after he did retire, he passed away. And I think part of the reason he passed away is he did not have other things in his life that energized him and kept him motivated, et cetera. And so that was the other lesson I learned from watching him. As great as he was as a father, you reach a point where you've got to make sure you have other things in your life and what you're doing. And we've always been very good about, doing volunteer work and being engaged in the community and friends and other things. And then one of the things that has been a calling for me for some time, my Christian faith is very important to me. Been a believer since my 20s. Been very involved with it. It has guided most of what I have done in my life. But I've always had a bit of a calling to learn more about my faith. And there's an opportunity to do some seminary work next year. Would start in the August timeframe. So that sort of helped drive the timing a little bit. So all of this is coming together.
Yeah.
And my wife and I, just with a lot of thought and prayer, said, there's probably no perfect time. Definitely from a financial position, there's no perfect time. You always want more.
Right.
But this seems to be the right time for us. And then a lot of things have happened along the way to just really confirm that. In fact, once I shared it with the board and staff and it went public, I've just had a great peace about this is the right thing to do. So that's sort of how it all came together. There's some other smaller things that have occurred that have led me to believe there's some opportunities to do some other kinds of work, possibly with either supporting local charities or local not-for-profits here in the Houston, Katy area. Some consulting work, but that's sort of secondary to what really drove the decision. It really came down to, it was right for my wife and I, the opportunity to do the seminary work starting in August, and just a leading that said there's always a time to step away, and there's a time to be engaged, and this was really feeling like a time to step away.
And I think at a high level, the timing does make sense because you look at the last 3 years, there's been so many things going on. 2020 was the announcement of the merger between NACE and SSPC, the Society for Protective Coatings, and getting ready for putting those organizations together in 2021. That really was the focus of the 2021 calendar year, was actually having those organizations merged, the staffs merged, and then actually seeing what that looks like and putting it into place. And then this current year, 2022, which is almost done, this is the first normal year of the merged NACE and SSPC, now AMP, because in 2021, obviously, you had so many pandemic considerations still in place. So this was the first year that we had our in-person conference under the new name. We've had a full event schedule. Really, 2022 was the first normal year under the AMP umbrella. So I don't want to say that 2023 is going to be quiet. There's certainly going to be a lot going on in corrosion and coatings, but at least relative to the last 3 years, it feels like the organization is a bit more on its feet, a bit more stable. And so perhaps that makes it an easier time for a transition. Does that make sense?
Yeah, Ben, it absolutely makes sense. And there's a couple things in what you said. There is no doubt that COVID in particular created a tremendous amount of stress and negative stress. And the merger created stress, but I would call that a positive stress. And but doing them together definitely was a challenge and in some way exhausting and exhilarating. And so that has come into play. I made a comment to somebody, and I don't know if this is exact or not, but theoretically those combined events took 3 to 5 years off my careers, because they just draw a lot out of you. The good of the merger, and of course the difficulties of COVID. But the other thing you said is important, and that is we're in a good place. So if you look at the people who do the work that I do, the CEOs and the executive directors of associations, particularly in the US, but I think this is true around the world, these jobs are very interesting. The average tenure of a CEO in an association is about 5 years. Because if you look at what happens, you get hired by a board, but as we know, our boards turn over. So about a third of your board turns over every year, and theoretically, every 3 years you have a new board. And so the people who were involved in your hiring often have moved on, and you've got new people and new ideas and new visions and new directions. And so it is challenging to stay on it. I take a lot of pride in the fact that I've gone through multiple generations of boards and have always been able to align with them and move it forward. But I've also watched a lot of my peers hit the reef, so to speak, that they end up being asked to leave or being removed from their office, get sideways with their boards, go under negative circumstances. And I use the football analogy. I don't want to be the quarterback who's hung on so long. They had a great career, but they stay a few years too long, and then they play really bad. And so when their career finally does come to an end, there's a negativity around it, because people don't remember the championships. They remember those last couple of years where they weren't playing very well. Right. And so I really wanted to, and this goes back a long time, when I did step away, I wanted to do it when things were good. And I want to leave a legacy that says, we put this organization in a great place, or as the Boy Scout motto says, left it better than we found it. So that was an important part of this as well, making sure that I go out while things are good and it's in a good place to hand over the keys. And I think that's where we're at. There's a lot of positive things happening right now.
So two-part question. What is the most common reaction or question once the news leaked that you've gotten from staff? And what's the most common reaction or question that you've gotten from membership now that this is out in the open?
I think the reactions are actually the same for both. So there's a lot of surprise, because let's be honest, most people don't leave when things are good. They probably overstay their welcome. And so it is unusual to step away at this point. And so there's an element of surprise that I'm going. I think there's some disappointment or, hate to see you go. I'm sure there's a few that are celebrating that it's time for me to go. You don't have a successful career if along the way you don't break some eggs and possibly upset some people. So I'm sure there's a few that feel that way. One rumor I do want to put to bed, and I didn't hear it on the staff side, but I heard it on the member side, is because this happened so quickly, is that there's a health issue involved. Is he sick, or has he been diagnosed with something that would drive this? And that is absolutely not true. I am as healthy. In fact, had a physical in June timeframe, and everything is where it should be for somebody who's 60 years old. Actually, it's a little better than for a 60-year-old. So there is no health issue at all that's driving this. And then the other rumor I sort of heard was that I've reached a frustration level, or that there's the boards or the member leaders have become frustrated with me and we're getting sideways. And that's not true. Very, very much aligned with where the leadership is taking the organization. And I think that's demonstrated by the fact that they not just invited me, they want me to stay on and make the transition happen. So any of those negative rumors you may hear, none of that is true. This really does come down to, it's the right time and place for my wife and I, and we're looking forward to continuing to be active, and as I said, a retreading to do something different but meaningful in our lives. Also, and I should say this, our second granddaughter is due the day before Thanksgiving.
Oh, that's awesome.
And we plan on spending a lot more time with the grandchildren. One of the challenges of this job is it's extremely demanding, a lot of international travel, away from home a lot, long hours, and you don't control a lot of it. Anybody who thinks they aspire to be the boss or the CEO because they think they're going to have more control, you're kidding yourself. You actually have a lot less control. And so one of the things I want to make sure is that I'm able to spend time with my family, my grandkids, have a positive influence there, and also with friends, and do some of the things that I enjoy and want to do. So that there's a little self-serving from that standpoint in the decision as well.
What does the path forward look like for AMP as an association in terms of actually identifying and naming your replacement? I guess first off, what's your role, if any, in that process? And then where are we now, and what are some of the criteria that the boards are looking at as they try to make this decision?
Yeah, so the board took. I'll back up a little bit. So I let the board know the 1st of September, or the chairman of the board's the 1st of September, and it took a little while to roll out. But they first of all have been awesome to work with. They're taking it very serious. A search committee has been named. That search committee has been working for a couple months now. They have identified a search firm to use.
Okay.
There is a timeline that has been built. The timeline is targeting that my replacement is named prior to annual conference, and our hope is that they would be able to attend annual conference. The search for a CEO can take a long time. It can be a very drug out process because it's an important decision and it's a difficult decision. They're very much though focused on an accelerated path, and there's some things that give them that optimism. Number one is we have outstanding internal candidates, potential candidates. They haven't called yet for candidates, but we have really qualified internal people. This is a very well-respected organization, and the job is really a top job. So there'll be strong outside candidates as well. So I expect the search should go pretty quickly. As I said, they've put a timeline together and they're moving on it. They have identified the search firm. They're working now to put together the call for candidates. And like I said, I see it moving quickly. As far as my role, other than making sure it gets off to a good start and to make sure that we do everything the right way, I don't have a lot of say in it. And that's really best practice. Associations are different than businesses. It's not uncommon in a business environment that the CEO would groom their replacement or have a big say on who would step into those shoes. You see that frequently, unless the CEO has gotten very sideways for some reason. But that's not the practice when it comes to the not-for-profit association world. One of the things we got to remember is this organization, it belongs to the members. As staff, we are stewards of it, and we take care of it, and we help lead it and make it successful. But we don't own it. We don't own it anyway. There's no stock. There's no ownership, and in the end, it is the members' decision. So my job is to help the members make the best possible decision they can make. They've got some things they need to consider. For example, are they happy with the path that the organization is on and the work that's been done this far? Do they want to make a change? Do they want to stay consistent with where the direction they've been on? Do they want a experienced CEO? Do they want to bring somebody in who maybe is an up and comer? Which, by the way, was my case. This was my first CEO position, so it's not unusual to see that happen, particularly in a time now where there's a lot of retirements and a lot of people leaving industry as a whole. They need to decide whether they want an association professional. Do they want somebody out of industry? So they're going through a discerning process to determine what kind of candidates they want for the position. That takes a little while, and then when that's done, they'll start the search process. But I'm really pleased with how serious they've taken it, how they've gone to work, how methodical they've been, and all of that's going to lead to a quality decision in a quick time frame. So they're on the right track, and really been exemplary in their work.
We're on the phone now with Bob Chalker, CEO of AMP. He's been CEO of NACE before that since 2010, wrapping up a 13-year run as leader of the organization. You mentioned your legacy earlier. I want to ask you what you think the two biggest parts of that are, or the two most memorable things that you've led these organizations through. The reason I say two, I suspect one of them is going to be the merger and what's gone on the last 3 years, but I think that's obvious. So certainly the merger can be part of the answer, but also outside of the merger, what do you think your legacy is here?
Yeah. So the merger is definitely one for sure. That's something that had been tried multiple times before and unsuccessful, and I can't take all the credit for that. In fact, I can only take a part of it. We had the right member leaders at the right time. We had the right staff on both organizations, the right commitment, the right approach, and so that truly was a team effort. But it will be one of the things that, as I look back on my career, that I'll take great pride in and see as a positive. I think the second is the staff. I'll tell a little story. I'd probably been at NACE at the time, about 2 years, and I was having dinner with a gentleman who I consider a mentor and a friend. He'd been a CEO for about 10 years at that point, so a bit ahead of me on his career path. And as we were having dinner, he made a statement to me. He said, "I love my staff. I love and trust and everything about my staff." And I walked away from that dinner asking myself, can I say that about the organization that we had? And I couldn't. And that's not necessarily a criticism of the staff who were there at the time, but it was a statement on the relationship I had with the staff. And I think it was a statement on how serious we were taking our roles and responsibilities, and were we positioning ourselves to truly be leaders in the organization. And that conversation led to things like the Leadership Academy that we've put in place, some of the decisions we made around our hiring practices, the idea that we're going to get the very best talent wherever we can get it, which, interesting enough, prepared us for COVID because we had hired a number of people
Yeah,
in
absolutely.
different locations in the world, because not everybody wants to live in Houston, Texas. It led us to make decisions about how we communicate with one another, about building the culture that we built here together. And, I always say about the culture, as the leader, I can define what the culture could be or should be, but I can't make it happen. Each individual makes it happen every day with every interaction. And so I think that's probably the second best thing. One of the things I do, I meet with employees on a regular basis, and we have these a couple different ways, but one is Coffee with Bob's, which is basically a cross section of people, 5, 6, 7 of us sit down, we have coffee, and we just talk. And one of the questions I always ask is, what brought you to AMP? Why did you come here? And usually the answer is, I applied for the job because I was looking for a job, or I knew somebody that worked here. In most cases, they didn't know much about the organization. The second question I always ask them is, why do you stay? And inevitably, the answer is the people or the culture. I take a lot of pride in that. I think building an organization that has an incredible culture, we can overcome anything. And I see it as probably the most important role that a CEO can play, is making sure you have the right team with all the tools and the things they need to be successful, and creating an environment or a culture that thrives. So I have to put that as my second, for sure.
Okay. No, that's a good one. The culture is very strong, and I think that's something that, it's much more of a staff perspective than membership, certainly, but a happy staff really serves the industry, and that's the role of this
Absolutely.
association. So that's the correlation that people might not instantly grasp, but it's certainly important. I think that's a big part of your legacy. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, and, if you think about it, think about how people have grown in their careers here. Not to pick on you, Ben, but doing these podcasts, right?
Right.
You've become incredibly talented at this. I can expect that if you go back and look at your early ones, um, probably not as strong, right?
Right.
That
For sure.
wasn't something you were a writer at that point in time. And one of the things I think we build a culture is to allow people to explore their careers,
Right.
and to really tap into their talents and to build and grow. One of the goals we set every year is so many hours of training and professional development. But the number of stories we have of people who have grown in their career, their professional career, and have been able to fulfill their own desires and dreams are incredible. And so there's story after story of that. And part of that is creating a culture where we're going to value people for what they are, who they are as people, not just what they do, but
Right.
really who they are as individuals, and allow them to thrive in that environment.
We'll wrap this up here. Bob, for people listening that are out in the industry or are currently AMP members, what's the message that you would like to leave them with? I know we've been talking for 25 minutes or so already, but as we go forward the next few months with really getting into the weeds of, the process for naming your replacement and hopefully coming out with that just before conference in March, and then next July, actually putting your replacement onto the job and seeing what that means for the association. What message would you like to leave our listeners with when it comes to what the next few months are going to look like?
Um, I may change it up on you. The next few months are going to be a little um, unsettling for some as we go through transition. Change is
Hmm.
always hard. Change is always difficult, and there's going to be an unsettling with staff, with members. People are going to be concerned, and rightfully so. I would encourage them to not get caught up in the rumor mill. That if they hear something, go get it validated. Just don't take it as fact, because I expect that there'll be some stories and rumors happening as we go through this process. I
Sure.
encourage them to be patient and to trust the process. They've got great member leaders who are really taking the effort to replace me serious, and I know they're going to come up with a good answer. But this is where I'd like to change it up. I'd like to talk a little longer term, because I really
Okay.
would like to leave a message. Look, AMP belongs to this industry, and it is what it is because of our volunteers. Staff is here to support. We're the infrastructure that underpins it. But in the end, what makes AMP the truly outstanding organization it is the industry itself and the volunteers. There's a lot of professional associations who are serving industries that fundamentally are not having much of an impact in their own way. They're dead on the inside. People are not engaged. People aren't volunteering. They've almost become irrelevant to their industry. In fact, there's a great book in our industry that was called The Race to Relevance. How does an association become relevant to its industry? That's not AMP. AMP is incredibly engaged with its industry. I think the industry as a whole has embraced our leadership and values what we do, whether it's certification or education or conferences or advocacy, whatever it is that we do. They valued our technical standards, have great influence. But that only happens because our volunteers are engaged. They give of their time and energy, and they're willing to do what it takes to make AMP the organization. So the message I have is, no matter who sits in the CEO role,
Mm.
be engaged, make a difference. I'll close with just a quick story. I was talking to another peer of mine, and I got to be honest, I was relenting a little bit about the fact that a few of my very passionate members weren't happy with something we did. I'll just say what it was. We made some significant changes to the way we do the awards banquet. We moved it away from a banquet to a reception after 70 years of it being a banquet type setup. But attendance was dwindling, and our next generation of people coming in didn't necessarily value the black tie chicken dinner model. So we
Hmm.
shook it up, and there were some people really upset about that, and there were some people that really loved it. And so I was sharing with this peer of mine that. And he said, consider yourself thankful. And I said, tell me more. He said, my organization, we could do that and nobody would really care. The fact that your members are that passionate that they will
Right.
voice their opinion, and good or bad, that they're engaged, makes your organization what it is and makes it influential. And so the big message I have for our member leaders is be engaged in the organization, let your voice be heard, but really get behind what AMP is trying to achieve. I think it's well positioned to continue to make a difference. And I think the mission that we've put in place, the vision, the strategies are all going to really make a difference, not just for today, but one of the things we're looking at is as technology changes, as society is changing, as we're seeing a turnover in the generations, that we're still relevant 20 years from now, 50 years from now, 100 years. And so my message to our members is engage, be part of the organization, volunteer to be on committees and boards and to take leadership roles or to write articles or to be on standards committees, to teach classes, but be present and be part of what we're doing.
Right. Right, because corrosion control and protective coatings, the need for those services is not going anywhere.
Absolutely, absolutely. Even if the technology changes, maybe there's a day that comes we're not building structures out of steel. We're still going to have all the old structures, but whatever material it's made out of, it's going to fail. It's going to have a failure mode. Maybe called something else, but that's what we're here for, is to protect our infrastructure.
Yep.
And ensure that it performs in the long term.
Exactly. Well, I think that's a hopeful note to leave this on. Bob, thank you so much for the time. For our listeners that may want more information, the best place to get it is online. You can go to amp.org, or you can search for AMP at your social media outlet of choice, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook. Just search for AMP, AMPP, and follow us. You can get the latest updates, both from Bob as well as the ongoing transition, the search, well, what will be a transition in 2023. If you want the latest updates, again, amp.org or AMP on any of your social media outlets is the best way to stay engaged and follow the process. Bob, thanks so much for the time.
Thank you, Ben. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. And folks, this is where we'll wrap for today. For Bob Chalker, I'm Ben Dubose. Thanks as always for listening, and please come back soon for another new AMP podcast.